morning, everybody. Firstly, can you hear me? Yeah, if you can hear me, just one person, please put it in the chat pane, so I know at least somebody can hear me. Right, so we are this morning talking about home working, employee wellbeing and mental health. Being myself leading on as compere. Kate Goodman will be coming in for the first part of our presentation. We have a guest speaker, Louise Goss of the Home Worker magazine. So you'll hear from them in due course. Right, so if I just talk through who we are. So we're an advisory service providing real-time business support to businesses within a catchment area, which is Cambridgeshire plus the surrounding areas. It's effectively the old Greater Cambridgeshire, Greater Peterborough LEP area. It's fully funded by the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority and Business Board, and we have local partnerships in place with the Cambridgeshire Chambers of Commerce, Federation of Small Businesses, the Institute Directors, Make UK, plus all the local councils, business networks and other organisations. We are providing a team of business advisors with knowledge spanning a wide range of industries. These business advisors are available to provide one-to-one advice to businesses to help them through COVID-19 and hopefully out the other side of this. And we have resources covering obviously HR, mental health, finance, marketing, import, export, business planning, sales, supply, logistics, warehousing, etc. We're doing a number of webinars so far to date. We've done one on human resources, layoff versus furlough. We've covered the government initiatives. We've covered accessing finance. Obviously today it's mental health and wellbeing and working from home. On Thursday this week we have marketing, crisis communications, and next week we have further ones around import, export. And I'm now going to pass on to Kate.
Lovely, thanks ever so much, Reg. Yes, so great, welcome everybody. So today I'd like to talk to you about some of the areas that most of us, I guess, will be struggling with in one way or another, either because we're trying to support our teams or because we ourselves are trying to come to terms with rapid change and continual threats to our businesses and livelihood. So I'd like to welcome our special guest today, Louise Goss. Louise is the founder and editor of the Home Worker magazine. As a journalist, she's worked for ITN, the BBC, Global Radio, and written for various print and digital publications. With over a decade of experience of working from home, Louise created the Home Worker as a resource to support the growing home working population. With expert comments and interviews, the magazine takes a holistic view, covering mindset, physical, mental health, productivity, communication, and the home workspace. I certainly am a subscriber to the magazine and find it an incredibly useful resource. So we're going to start the session today by just taking a quick look at some of the science behind the way we might be feeling right now, in order to understand that whilst uncomfortable, it is actually absolutely normal. We're going to take a look at some of the ways that we can support our own wellbeing and those around us, including our teams. And I'm going to ask Louise to talk about home working, what's happening currently, and some of the areas that we could be focusing on. I'll cover a little bit about the legislation of our responsibility as an employer. And finally, we're going to take a quick look at mental health and what we can do to support our teams, and also to think about our own mental health. There's clearly a lot going on right now, and we're all thinking about our business's future. We might be furloughing employees and just trying to work our way through new information that changes almost daily. And while we're doing that, we do need to think about how our employees and colleagues may be feeling and coping with the situation, and what we could be doing to support them, whatever those circumstances are. So let's try to normalise how we're all feeling at the moment and start with a bit of science. So Rich, could you move me on, please? So I guess we all know about fight or flight, don't we? And so for the purposes of today, I'd like to get you to think about it as a tiger. Now you'll see at the top of the screen there, there's a graphic there of a tiny little thing that sits just behind our ear. It's about the size and shape of an almond, and it's called the amygdala. And the amygdala is the thing that manages our emotions, and it takes charge when we're frightened or feel threatened. And right now the amygdala is in absolute full swing. Now, of course, the amygdala was great when the biggest threat to us was, potentially a large predator that might come and attack us. We don't need that so much now, but unfortunately, the amygdala doesn't know that. So to the amygdala, the current pandemic is absolutely a tiger. Now, it's a pretty basic piece of kit. It has two settings, tiger or no tiger. So when threatened, our body automatically goes into tiger mode. Now, when that happens, the body is flooded with chemicals such as cortisol and adrenaline. Your heart rate goes up and you start to feel super alert. Your breathing shallows and your muscles get ready for a whole lot of action, whether that be fight, flight, or in some cases freeze. And those chemicals are responsible for a whole host of other reactions, both physical, cognitive and behavioural, like the ones listed here on the screen. All great in the moment, but not necessarily good for us in the long term. And it's absolutely these reactions, when not dealt with or struggling with in the longer term, can lead to poor mental health. So you might look at some of those reactions here and say, well, gosh, I can relate to some of those. I've had some nightmares. I really struggle to remember things. I really struggle to get focused. I've been sleeping more. I've had a bit of an upset stomach. I've had some headaches. And they're all a perfectly normal reaction to the amygdala's view of the threat that we have right now. Now, even if you feel scared or not right now, it doesn't matter. In your conscious mind, that's one thing, but the amygdala is going to react regardless of how you might be feeling more consciously. So here's the current challenge. All the messages that we're getting currently say stay home, stay put, but that doesn't really compute with fight or flight, and it doesn't necessarily match with the messages we're receiving as employees, which is all about having to come out to work or having to react in a very different way. And on top of that, we're having to process change and huge amounts of information at a speedy rate. So we're having to make critical, complex and life-changing decisions about our lives and our businesses just when our mind is running around screaming tiger. So the two don't necessarily work very well together. And what happens as a result of that is we start to feel an awful lot of stress and anxiety. We become overwhelmed and react in ways that we don't expect. And trust me, everything you're feeling, doing, and the way you and your teams are behaving are all perfectly normal. Now, what you need to be able to do is spot the signs of tiger and understand how it might affect you and your teams so that you can then offer some support. So you'll notice all sorts of things in terms of behaviour that you might not normally see from certain individuals. And remember, it's really difficult to think straight when you've got tiger going on. So we can become really bad at doing things like making decisions, retaining information, thinking clearly, just at a time when we need to do things extremely well. So we need to think about how we can support employees, colleagues, with that kind of science in mind and understanding that it's just a normal reaction to the threat that we currently see. Now, of course, in addition to this, what we're also seeing is a huge amount of change, and not everybody deals with change in the same way. Some people just love change and, change for change's sake. Sorry, just bear with me. Apologies, you just knew that was going to happen, didn't you, today? So some people just love change, and others will take longer to adjust and gain that they will all be feeling their emotions in a very same way and struggling with things that may be happening. I feel like the man now. We talked, didn't we, before this started, about the man with the child coming into the room. Just bear with me. And they'll be feeling their own emotional feelings and going on their own journey with everything that's happening. So some of the behaviours that you might see with individuals is some might information seek, like there's no tomorrow. Some people will start to get angry and will pick arguments even though there isn't really an argument to be had. Some will just simply panic about the whole situation. So you might find some people make a lot of jokes, and you find that you think, well, gosh, that's a bit of a flippant behaviour in a very serious situation. It's just their own way of dealing with it. And some might deny the problem completely. And for you as an employer, you might see that as potentially disinterest from your employee, and that may not be the case. And some will become overly active and efficient, and isn't that great for some of us. So what can we do to support our employees and people around us, even ourselves, with our own well-being and start to get rid of some of that tiger? So I've put together just a few on the next slide, just a few tips in terms of some of the things that we could be doing. So the first thing is to breathe. If you control your breathing, you're basically telling your body that there is no tiger. So your body in turn will reduce the adrenaline and cortisol that it's producing, and some of those reactions then will slow to a halt. So it's really quite simple and quite a magical process that the body can manage for itself. Now on YouTube, you'll find some great videos to have a look at in terms of some of those breathing techniques that you can adopt. The second thing that you could do is to start to communicate. Now, in a work sense, that will be about talking to your people and over communicating, if anything, remembering that they might be furloughed, they might be working from home, and they can't see what you're doing, they can't see what's going on in the business. So you're going to have to keep telling them and keeping them up to date. But I'm sure Louise will talk more about that shortly. In a social sense, staying connected to friends, family. We've all made new friends with our neighbours now, haven't we, as we pop outside every Thursday evening to bash saucepans together and say thank you to the NHS. And when you do things like that, your body produces a feel-good hormone called oxytocin. And again, that will help you to overcome some of the feelings of stress and anxiety that you might be experiencing. I strongly recommend that you limit social media and some of the news coverage that you can see, understanding that when you look at social media, most of what you're seeing are simply rumours. You do need to refer to and use official sources for information, places like the NHS website, the .gov website, because at least we can see that the information on there will be credible. I would equally limit the amount of news that you watch. And certainly don't be watching the news late at night. We know that we all need to get a good night's sleep. 7 hours is the recommended daily dose. And if you're watching the news quite late at night, your mind's going to be racing as you go to bed, and you're going to find it really difficult to get off to sleep. I won't talk too much about goals and routine in a work sense, because I know we're going to cover that a bit later, but certainly in a social and home sense, remember that setting just small goals each day, maybe just achieving one or two things, it's going to give you a huge sense of achievement and keep you on track in terms of some of the things that you're doing. And certainly adopting a routine, even if that daily routine is about getting up, getting dressed, getting showered, having breakfast, having your meals at regular times, and trying to manage, I'm sure all of us are trying to manage a bit of homeschooling, a bit of working from home, and still continuing to manage the household. So having those routines in place is going to help you. Eating healthily is really important right now. So try and eat fresh fruit and veg. They're packed with good vitamins, and your body really does need that right now. Like I say, have regular meals and avoid snacking if you can. And then get physical. I mean, gosh, there are so many online classes available right now, aren't there, if you're all interested in doing a bit of Joe Wicks. But the really important thing about exercise is it doesn't just work on endorphins. Regular physical activity can increase your dopamine and serotonin levels, and they're what we would know as your happy hormones. So they're really important for you to stay in a good frame of mind for your well-being. And of course, when we look at home working and we think about exercise for our teams, there's no reason why you can't be organising some weekly activity with your team. So you kind of do some team exercise, which again will give you a sense of working closely and keeping everybody joined up as a team at the same time as thinking about their own well-being. And then one more thought, and I think it's really important for you, is to look for and ask for help. That might be somebody that can provide some expertise for you if you're thinking about making decisions about your business, simplifying all the information that's out there, because gosh, there's a huge amount right now to try and understand and decipher, and helping you to just pull out the bits of information that you really need to know, which of course is going to help you make decisions. So let's move on and have a quick look at home working. Now I'll just cover the legislation. So when you do have your employees working from home, just because they're not in the workplace, it doesn't remove your responsibility towards their health, safety and well-being. So you are still responsible for that under the Health and Safety at Work Act. So as an employer, you've got the same health and safety responsibilities for home workers as you have for any other workers. And it's very unlikely that employers can carry out the usual health and safety risk assessments at an employee's home. However, there are some things that you could still be doing and checking on. So firstly, you do need to check that each employee feels the work that they're being asked to do at home can be done safely. They do have the right to have the right equipment to enable them to do that. And you will need to keep in regular contact with your employees, including ensuring that they don't feel isolated. And you do need to make reasonable adjustments for any employee who has a disability or anybody that may be struggling with musculoskeletal issues in terms of their home setup. Now, if changes are needed, you are responsible to make sure that those changes happen. You do have responsibilities to take reasonable care. The employees have responsibilities to take reasonable care of their own health and safety. And anybody working from home should be talking to their manager about any health and safety risks that they may see or any home working arrangements that they might need to change. And when someone's working from home, both permanently and temporarily, as an employer, you should be considering formally how you're going to keep in touch with them, what activity that you want them to do, can it be done safely, and do you need to put control measures in place to protect them? So some of the things that you might want to do is put together a home working policy, and that will set some of those ground rules in terms of working hours, responsibility, expectations around what people are going to achieve while they're working from home. Now, there are some simple steps that you could also do to reduce the risk from any display screen work that people are having when they're working from home. So breaking up long spells of DSE work with rest breaks, avoiding awkward and static postures by regularly changing position, getting up and moving around and doing some stretching exercises, and avoiding eye fatigue by changing focus or blinking from time to time. All of those things you could be supporting your employees with. And I said having a home working policy in place is going to help you with those ground rules. I would strongly recommend that you have a look at the ACAS website. There is a great guide on there in terms of working from home, and they give some great examples here of some of the things that you could be doing. Now, as I said, we're really lucky today to have Louise join us and to impart some of her knowledge and experience of home working. So Louise, over to you, I guess, for the next section. And I'd be really interested to find out from you what you think are some of the key aspects of home working, both in terms of where employees might struggle, but also what we can do to effectively support our teams.
Yeah, okay, well, thank you very much for having me on today. I mean, working from home, it's quite a big topic, but we're all doing it right now. And yeah, it's something I'm sort of living and breathing with the magazine, but also doing it myself and with 2 young children at home. And I think that is one of the first things to acknowledge, that right now, working from home is not how we would normally be working from home. And I think it's important for us all to realise that our teams and our staff members and anybody involved in the organisation are going to be experiencing this situation and working from home very differently, and also not as we would normally be experiencing it. So we wouldn't normally have 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds running around the house as I currently do. And I think because of that, right now is this first point that I'm talking about is about transparency and about being able to have those conversations. Everybody needs to feel comfortable, I think, to be able to approach their line managers, and for managers to be quite proactive in opening up the conversations about people's individual situations. Some people are going to be struggling more than others. And I think that there has to be quite a high level of compassion and understanding at the moment. And so having these sort of very open conversations about what are their limitations, what is their current situation. Not everybody has the comfort of their own home office, for instance. They might be having to work from the kitchen table. They might have young children running around and other stresses and things to deal with. There are lots of outside world problems going on at the moment. People might have worries about loved ones and health issues as well. So I think just really understanding and knowing what people might be struggling with at the moment is the first thing, and to encourage having those conversations and to be understanding. It might be the time that people need to ask for certain, help. Kate's mentioned that, perhaps more flexible hours or skewing their working day to a point. So all those sorts of things need to be taken into consideration at the moment. Isolation is one of the things that I know from experience and model of the home worker community, who I talk to, struggle with. It's one of the sort of the first things that people talk about when they say, what do you struggle with working from home? What are the main challenges? And it differs between those who are perhaps self-employed doing it and those who are working for an organisation. And if you are working for an organisation, then there are lots more opportunities to have a bit more engagement and to feel part of the team. But I think right now, when we're all doing this virtually, it's really important to, again, encourage that and be quite proactive in organising perhaps more social events and things that you can do as a team. It's going to be much harder as well for people who are living on their own and aren't sort of within a family group at home as well. So, it's very easy to say interact socially, but I do know from experience how important it is. I mean, ordinarily you might have those after work catch-ups, drinks, those water cooler moments that we talk about. They're not going to be happening at the moment. So, even if you organise, team events, quizzes, those sorts of things that you can do sort of after hours that kind of can bond the team together and just encourage that social interaction again, and even allowing a bit of time perhaps before or at the end of a meeting. And particularly what I know some people have found useful is having a kind of end of the day meeting, but with a more social bent to it. So it might just be a 10-minute wrap-up conversation, but it really helps to kind of help people debrief, unwind, chat through any issues potentially, but also just chat on a more social level. And that not only just helps people again feel get part of the team again, which because they don't have their colleagues around, but it also helps to really signify the end of the working day, which is the next point around sort of encouraging really sort of distinct working hours. That's actually something at the end there, but it's a really important point, and Kate's touched on the importance of routine and structure. And I think right now, routine, as much as it helps with productivity and staying on track, it also right now really helps with a sense of safety, security and normality, which we don't have at the moment. So just having a kind of routine in place and knowing that when you're starting work and when you're finishing work, and as an employer, to be very clear that it's okay, at 5 o'clock, at 5:30, whenever their working day might typically end, that it is okay and you have permission to switch off. Having those emails coming through late at night can actually trigger more anxiety and make people feel as if that sort of guilt feeling. I know people who, when they very first start working from home, and it's a new scenario to them, there's almost this sort of low-level anxiety of like, I must be switched on, I must be logged on, I must be seen to be working. And as good as that is, it's also a sort of a stress factor there. And so, to just let people know that, these are your working core hours and we're not expecting you to go over and beyond that, particularly at the moment. And I also think at this point it's important to acknowledge that we're going through a very unfamiliar and new situation. We're not necessarily going to be at our most productive. And again, we need to really be understanding about that as well. Coming on to the fact that we're all online, we're all doing everything virtually. It's great, the technology's there and it's helping us, that's brilliant. But equally, working from home at the moment when everything is online and you're in a lot of online meetings, it's very intense. The level of intensity that people are going to be working at is going to be very high at the moment. And there is a phrase which is quite new, but I heard about it a few months ago when I was actually interviewing somebody in China, an employee in China who, when they had just started, they were about a month into the lockdown, and that is Zoom fatigue. And it might be something that we hear a lot more about. But it's that fact that when you are constantly online and in virtual meetings, you're not getting all the visual cues that you would normally have when you're in a meeting. You're not getting the non-verbal communication. You're having to focus very intently, listen very carefully. Now, I know people who've said that their meetings have improved because of this, and they're actually run much more efficiently. However, it is really important to be aware of people's capacity, really, for staying online, and to sort of look at the length of the meetings that you're having, to look at the frequency of the meetings that you're having online, and just to allow people that sort of space to also just get on with their own work, as well as having constant meetings all the time. It is important, however, obviously, to keep checking in on people. So there's a balance there that really needs to be struck. I know from writing about leadership in the latest issue of the magazine that we talked about, micromanaging is obviously not going to be particularly effective at the moment. People can feel quite anxious again if people are feeling constantly checked in on. However, if you think or have any sort of concerns about an employee, then again, as I've mentioned, being quite proactive in addressing these, in asking them, having sort of some one-to-one time with employees, again, is still really important. And I think, you know, you might have somebody who's delivering on time and who's producing work to a very high standard, and that's brilliant. But what we're not always aware of is how that work is being produced and in what sort of state, and you know, that person might still be struggling. So I think just being, you know, just offering those sort of one-to-one times and just having the odd check-in periodically is really important, and can be really beneficial to everybody in the organisation. And again, that goes back to making sure those lines of communication are open and that people feel comfortable having those conversations. Right. Oh, I think, Kate, I think you're on mute. There you go.
Right. There's really interesting stuff there, Louise. Thank you for that. And I guess, you know, just a few bits that I've just pulled out from there, without a doubt, are this kind of expectation of productivity. And I think you talked about it, didn't you? Kind of, you know, when you're setting goals and targets for your teams, to understand that actually starting with something very small and then gradually building that up as they get more used to the home working routine probably would be a good idea.
Yes, yeah, definitely. It is. It's a learning curve. I mean, some of us, myself, and some of your workers may even be very used to remote working or do it occasionally, but doing it day in, day out in this particular situation, this is unfamiliar to everybody, and so there is a learning curve, and there's going to be a period of adaptation that's required, and you know, that's going to be something that everybody has to adjust to.
And I saw in your, and we will talk about the Home Working magazine because I think it's a fantastic resource. I saw in there in the recent edition, there is an article, isn't there, about leadership. Yeah. I just, it would be worth touching on that, because I think in terms of home working, there is going to have to be quite a big steer, isn't there, from the manager to the employee to ensure that allowance is understood, that it is okay to stop at a certain time, that, you know, they're not expecting some of those things to be done. And, you know, I certainly have noticed, certainly with some of my clients, where normally they might ask for something and, you know, we talk about it in the next day or two. I'm almost in a position where they're asking for something and then an hour later they're asking again, because of course their world looks very different for them right now. And I guess it's how you adapt as a leader to ensure that you're maintaining that influence and trust, but having, I guess, to think about the way that you act with your employees before you physically do it.
Yes, definitely. I mean, this situation is going to sort of expose, which is sort of what I talked about in the article, actually, expose how well you lead or don't at the moment, and how well you know your team. And I think knowing people on a more personal level, and in some ways this situation helps that, because you might get a situation where somebody's little 3-year-old runs into the room, and that can actually break the ice. And I think you can, as long as that isn't something that you actually give people you know, problems about, then and you sort of accept that it is part of what's going on at the moment, then yeah. And I mean, lead by example as well. And if you're not expecting people to be switched on and at work at 9 p.m. at night, then you try not to send those emails out at that time yourself, or give them, so there's a lot of kind of little things that you can do just to ensure that you're checking in with people, keeping the communication open, setting the good example, really.
Yeah, I think they're all really, really valid points, aren't they? We've had a couple of questions come in that I'll just pick up. I know Rich will be doing that, but I just think they're worth just touching on right now, because I think the time's right to talk about them. So somebody here is saying, how do you get round when somebody's using things like a laptop and a screen, without having to go away and buy office chairs and stuff? How do you think about getting yourself set up practically in your home office environment? Is that something that you comment on, Louise?
Well, it's yes, I do. In most of the issues, we sort of have an ergonomic section of some sort, because we have looked at ways to set up your home space ergonomically. You're right. We don't have occupational health at home and people coming around doing assessments, so it is something to be really conscious of. If you cannot have the ideal ergonomic setup, and not everyone's going to have that, one of the best things you can do is actually to keep moving, and just recommend that people, regularly, at least every hour, get up, stretch. You talked about this, Kate, but sort of regular movement, because as one ergonomist I spoke to said, in some ways the best position is the next position, which just means keep changing that position, because if you sort of stood like this all the whole time, everything starts to seize up, and that's when pain starts to happen. If you don't have a proper laptop stand, raise the laptop up on a couple of books. There are little things that you can do just to make things slightly better. In terms of seated posture, it's just sort of thinking about the right angles that you're meant to be sitting at with everything. And again, small things like if you're overreaching, everyone recommends having a sort of not using the keypads with the number pad on the side as well, because that can cause sort of strain. So there are little things you can do and encourage people to do and take responsibility for themselves. There are lots of resources out there that sort of, for instance, show the best seated posture. And I think, as I said, one of the main things would be to encourage them to keep moving. And it sounds funny, but we often talk about having a dance break. Put some music on, get up, have a dance around your room. Nobody can see you, you're at home. So that's one of the beauties of it. But it kind of lifts the spirits, it changes perceptions, it shifts the energy around, and it changes the body position as well. And all of that is really useful regularly.
The other thing, Louise, is that just on that point is the fact that people can get quite comfortable, can't they? They like to sit in a bit of comfort. So, you do see people who are just sat on the sofa with a laptop, because it's just so much easier, it's more relaxed, it's more comfortable. But when you think about it, they're building up neck strain because they're tending to look downwards. There's all these things which are going to impact them, but it's comfortable, it's easy, it's more relaxed.
It's comfortable in the short term, but I think that's the problem, is that, as you've just highlighted, it's eventually that catches up on you. I mean, even a few hours sitting in the wrong position, if you've taken the laptop to bed or on the sofa, you start to notice it. So I do think, encouraging people, they may not have, as I've said, a home office or a special proper desk even, but there are things you can do to adapt your home. You might use the kitchen table. Maybe you have cleared a dressing table and you're using that. Console tables, a little side table can be used if you can fit a chair underneath it. So there are little things and spaces in your home where you can kind of just adapt it temporarily to make it more fit for purpose.
The other thing you can do, of course, is a stand.
Yes, and yes, I should have said actually standing, very much recommended as well, or not standing permanently, but switching, standing for a little, for maybe an hour, then sitting for a bit, and again keep on changing the posture.
Yeah.
And I see on your website, Louise, there's a great picture of you standing, working with this wonderful, I guess, adjustable stand that you can use. That looks very good.
It's brilliant. Yes, it's one by Posturite. It's a sit-stand platform. So you just basically put it on top of your normal desk. So you don't have to go out and buy a proper standing desk, and you can just raise and lower the platform as and when you need to. So it's brilliant. It's really versatile.
Yeah.
I have one of those in front of me. It's not a posture right, but I have another one.
Yeah.
There you go. And I have from home. I work from home normally, but I don't have the luxury of kind of a whole room that's an office for me. I'm sort of tucked at the end of a different room, but I have a desk that's electric, so it moves up and down, so you can kind of sit in the morning and then raise it and then work, standing up. So it's great because you get that, that variety from it, which is great. I guess just one final question for me when we talk about home working, and then we'll move on to mental health. But this is all we're talking, aren't we? As if this is new to somebody, home working. But of course, for many of us, we've been home working for a long time.
Yeah.
But even for those that have been working from home for a long time, things feel very different for us. And I certainly, I've struggled as things change, because of course my customer is changing in the way that they work, and therefore their demands on me are very different. I guess, my question is, have you seen those very similar changes for yourself in this situation, and what are some of the things that you've had to do as a seasoned home worker to adapt?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And I think that's more to do, obviously, what's going on outside, and your points about, not always watching the news and not sort of having social media on 24/7, all that sort of thing is really, really useful to think about. But yeah, I mean, I worked from home for years, but my husband normally goes out to the office to work. And so now suddenly we've got myself and him trying to jostle for workspace and supervise 2 young children who aren't old enough to be left to their own devices yet. So all of that is very new, and we're having to juggle with it daily and come up with it. We've had to come up with a bit of a structure and a bit of routine and a bit of a timetable about where, and have regular conversations actually as a family, like, discussing between my husband and I, when we can use the office space, and talking about the office space. We've even mercilessly thrown my 3-year-old out of her bedroom to share with her brother, so that we have used her bedroom. We've converted her room into an office, because we realised that with the 2 of us working from home, that space to kind of shut away was actually even more critical, and not having it in the middle of the place where the children were playing. So yeah, we've had to adjust, and I think it's a bit of a roller coaster for everybody at the moment emotionally. As you say, I'm used to this. I do it all the time, and I've had moments where I've just sort of sat down at the end of the day and it suddenly hit me, and I've just gone, oh gosh, and I felt quite wobbly actually. So I think that it's something that you might not even be aware of, and you can think that you're plodding on pretty fine, and then something, you might not even be aware of what the trigger is. It just, perhaps you've built up a lot of stress, and you're trying to, just getting through each day at the moment can be quite stressful for some people. So yeah, I think definitely it's new to everybody.
No, thank you for that. And actually, that's a very nice segue into our next topic to discuss, which is mental health. And I guess we're all in a very different position, aren't we, in terms of our own mental health. We will have some people that are almost, I'm almost in a bubble. I live in a lovely rural setting. I'm not exposed to seeing the effects of the current crisis on a daily basis, and I could easily fall into the trap of thinking everything is wonderful out there. But of course, then you've got people at the other end of the spectrum in terms of people working for National Health. They're absolutely in the eye of the storm on a daily basis. And that is kind of relentless stress and anxiety that they're feeling. And of course, right at the beginning, I said, all of this is perfectly normal for us, and it's all perfectly healthy for us to react in the way that we are, assuming that we have this situation on a temporary basis. But of course, the longer we struggle with stress and anxiety, the more likely it is that will progress and become a mental health issue for us in the longer term. So I think, it's worth us having the conversation today about mental health and thinking about how we can approach a healthy view on mental health. And I think the first thing and most important thing to say about mental health is that we all have it. It's no different than our own physical health. And just as we do with physical health, sometimes we feel absolutely great, and sometimes we feel just a little under par. And there's no difference in terms of that outlook when we think about both our physical and our mental health overall. So in the top right hand corner of the slide, I've just put the mental health continuum, because I think it's really important just to understand the continuum, what it looks like. So if we look at one side of the scale here, we have somebody who might be diagnosed with serious mental illness, and on the other side, somebody who has no mental illness that's been diagnosed at all. And we know, don't we, that a huge percentage of the population may well have a mental illness, but that it hasn't been diagnosed. But equally, if we look up at the up and down line, then we can see that, at any given point, we can be in very poor mental health, and at best, we can be in optimal mental health. And I think the point I want to make here is that any of us can be in any of these places at any given time. And it varies, as you said, Louise, a number of times a day, I might go from, feeling that my mental health is very poor, and then I can bounce back and be, back in optimal mental health tomorrow. The concern is when you are, of course, in poor mental health on a continual basis, and you're not getting the support that you need, nor are you potentially aware that this is potentially a growing problem. So one way you can help yourself, of course, is to look out for signs that poor mental health may be occurring. And if you see this, then you shouldn't be afraid to have a conversation with your employee, or whoever it is that you recognise it in, either in them or in yourself. And one way to do that might be to open up about how you're feeling. I know certainly I've had good days, and I've had days when I've been very tearful, days when I've been really quite angry, and picked up with many people that I probably shouldn't have done on that particular day. But I think recognising the sign is key, and then acting and talking about it is a great way of being able to support other people. And quite often what you find is that you have to open up and talk about how you feel, and then what happens, of course, somebody else says, well, gosh, yeah, I felt exactly the same way. And then that starts to enable a real meaningful conversation in how you might be managing that. What I've tried to capture on this slide is just some of the early signs that you might see both in yourself and in individuals that they might be struggling with their mental health. So poor concentration, I mean, we've said it was very difficult when you're changing somebody's circumstances, they're trying to work from home. It can be very difficult to focus, but if on a long-term basis they're really struggling with their concentration, then that might be an indicator. Being easily distracted, and certainly worrying a lot more, and being more concerned with things that you might not normally be worried about. Finding it hard to make decisions, and you can see, can't you, some of these are very similar to what we talked about before when we were talking about that whole fight and flight, and the reaction that we will have when our amygdala goes into full action. And on a short-term basis, that's absolutely fine and normal. It's when this happens, it occurs for a much longer period of time. So people being tired. And of course, there's a never-ending cycle to some of these things when we think about coping mechanisms. So somebody might feel tired, they might feel anxious, and what they do then is they think, well, I'll have a glass of wine or 2 or 3 in the evening to make me feel a bit better. Unfortunately, then what happens is normally if you have a glass of wine, you might find it more difficult to sleep. Therefore, you become more tired, and then you think, I'll have another glass of wine, that'll help me sleep. And you can start to see that some of those coping mechanisms, if not managed well, may well start to put you in a downward spiral. So moving on, I think there are a few things, just a few tips from us that you could be doing to support your teams. So I think firstly, the most important thing is to have a discussion. And one of the things you could be doing right now is talking about today's webinar. So, I went on a great webinar today. We talked about stress and anxiety, we talked about wellbeing and mental health. And these are some of the things that I learned. I learned about some of these being, real key and critical signs and indications. And actually it surprised me because I've been feeling some of those things too. It starts to open up that kind of conversation and says, you know what, it's okay to be feeling this way. It's okay to talk about it without fear of being judged or any kind of reprisal. Because quite often an employee isn't going to talk to their employer about how they're feeling, fear that they might be judged or seen to be failing. And moving on from that conversation, one of the things you could be doing to support your teams is to be putting and encouraging your teams to put together a self-care plan. So you can see on there, might be identifying some of the things that they might be able to do to support both their physical well-being, their cognitive well-being, their spiritual well-being, and some of the things that they could think about and healthy coping mechanisms that they could think about adopting. Also thinking about where their support system is. So is that, you know, friends, family, who can they go and talk to if they are feeling particularly low or struggling with their own mental well-being? And Louise talked about the feeling of isolation, so being really clear with your employees that you're, you know, you're open for a conversation. And then moving on, mental health, there's plenty of available training that you could use this opportunity to get your employees to think about the training that they can take part in. There is a great level 2 training course in basic mental health awareness that is perfectly free. You can go onto any college website and find the information about those training courses that are available. And then finally, one of the things you could do is set up a buddy system. So employees have got, you know, once they've done their training and they're more aware about mental health, both in their own well-being and for others around them, then set up that buddy system so that they've got a go-to person within the organisation that they can speak to openly, something that they feel maybe a little bit more comfortable with rather than the boss that they can open up and talk to. So there's a few tips on some of the things that you could be doing. Now, as we draw to a close, and I think there's some questions that we can answer, one of the things I do want to refer you to is the Homeworker magazine. And I know Louise wouldn't necessarily mention this, but as I said, I found the magazine to be an absolutely amazing resource. The magazine itself has been running for a number of months now, and there are a number of back editions. But what you can see on the screen is the current edition of the Homeworker magazine when homeworking went viral. It's absolutely packed front to back with a whole host of different articles and lots of things that you can draw on. I've put some links there to the Homeworker magazine webpage and to the LinkedIn page, but also there is a page there for corporate membership, and if organisations wanted to sign up on behalf of their employees and allow their employees to have access, again, there's some great resources. Louise, what would you say are some of the top articles in this edition of the Homeworker magazine that might be particularly useful?
Gosh, we mentioned the one on leadership actually, and just sort of how to manage remote teams and looking at the sort of the challenges, but also some of the things that you can do. And we've spoken to sort of leadership development experts and those sorts of things for this article. We looked at flexible working as a whole and spoke to a number of people who kind of advocate for flexible working, organisations who've taken it on and do it sort of on a very wide basis, and sort of again the sort of pros and cons and addressing the challenges of it as well. We've got quite an interesting article on trust from a psychologist, all about, you know, the psychology of trust and how easy is it to trust people, and looking at kind of how, because obviously right now we're all having to trust when we can't see everybody in the office. You know, that's one of the things that holds a lot of people back from letting people work from home. And within the magazine itself, we've got things around time management and productivity, recommendations and reviews for things like apps, ergonomic chairs, you know, lots of little things. So and I'd say, but actually one article that I find really interesting, somebody, she's a lawyer, and she wrote all about her experience of working from home. But what I love about her article is that she basically kind of dispels the myths that if you work from home you can't do particularly good work, and actually what she's showing is that actually you can negotiate Brexit deals and work on the UK space programme from your kitchen table, and actually working from home does not necessarily mean that the calibre of work that you do has to be any less.
Okay, brilliant. And I think if you go to that bottom link there, thehomeworker.com /corporate, there are actually some sample pages that you can have a look at before you sign up, just to see the quality of the work that's there. But I know firsthand that it's absolutely fantastic. Rich, before I say thank you to Louise, do we have any questions?
Yeah, I mean, actually, just Louise, on the point you just talked about in terms of working from home and achieving things, it's quite interesting. We've had some interesting examples recently. One of employees actually not enjoying working from home, just they prefer to be in an office environment, and that social element that goes on, and chatting, and, you know, all those water cooler breaks, and actually just finding it really difficult to replicate that. So actually a business that I know that recently announced the sale of its offices, which had the impact of actually half the staff were crying about the fact that they weren't going to actually be going back to an office and they'd be working from home, and all those friendships, everything, it's a different world. And I think it's actually coping mechanisms for people, because not everybody's ready to work from home. Yeah. And may choose their employer based on actually having an office.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think that it's a funny time. Some people love it, some people learn to love it, and then other people just don't like it. And I completely understand, because you don't have the same structures, you don't have the same social interaction. When I first started working from home myself, I went from a corporate environment, and I was in a very busy newsroom. It was a big open plan office. We were chatting about things all the time. It takes some adjusting, it takes some getting used to, and you have to be very conscious of yourself on how you are coping, and put in place things for yourself. If you know that you need more interaction, that it's, as I've said, you kind of need to orchestrate that and engineer it for yourself and make sure that it happens in the day. But it's definitely one of the challenges. And yeah, it's not going to be for everybody, and obviously not every job is suited to working from home. We have to obviously acknowledge that too.
Another point is we talked about actually having a definite end to the day, but part of what actually both sort of advocated throughout is actually that people could have flexible hours and actually juggle things and flex their days. And if they want to go out for a walk during the day, they go for a walk during the day, and they make that time up later. So there doesn't necessarily need to be a definite end to days. I think that's the whole point of flexible working. Mm-hmm. And I think that's going to be a real challenge for employers actually, as to how they see that. Because they're not going to have visibility of their staff. They can't check them the whole time. They don't know what they're doing. There is a huge element of trust around this, and I'm not sure it's an easy one to address.
Yes, I know that the trust issue is huge. And I think that comes back to the point that we sort of hear about at the moment, where it's all about outputs rather than hours. And as long as they do achieve the goals, and you've got things in place where you know that this is the expectation, and as long as that is being met, rather than having to, I guess, as I said, sort of micromanage how many hours they're sat at the desk doing it. Yes, that sort of end of the day thing I think is useful for some people if they have those sort of core office hours, but as you said, the flexibility of working from home is one of the main appeals. So and again, it's something you have to talk to perhaps on an individual basis, but some people like to get up at 5 a.m. and get up and crack on and do a lot of good work, and finish a bit earlier. And that's the beauty of this, and actually why it can be so beneficial to people's mental health as well. Sometimes people actually like the fact that they're around for the family, they can arrange their day as they please, and actually has a lot of well-being benefits.
Speaking personally, I can actually say that working from home is a negative for me, because the food available is just appalling.
Wow.
That's a very good point, Rich. I think just one thing I would add, and certainly probably from my own experience, is you've got to be able to psychologically end your working day. Now, it doesn't matter what time it is, but certainly I've over the years I've set my working environment up at home in very different places. But I think if you can, to have somewhere where you can close the door on it at the end of the day. Yeah. Because I think the challenge is that if it's in the corner of the living room, or you keep yourself logged in on the kitchen table as you're trying to eat, the problem is that work is always there. It's always on your mind, and you can't switch off. So being able to even if that is, like I say, closing the laptop and putting it away if you're in a small environment, or being able to have it in a room where you can close the door on it, it's that psychological switch off. I know it sounds a bit mad, but one of the things I do each day when I go into my virtual office at home is I always say good morning. There's nobody in there, but for me it's just that psychological piece of I'm walking in somewhere and saying hello, and for me that's a really important piece that I miss, of being part of a team.
Well, one of the suggestions actually from one of the attendees was actually you could suggest a short walk as a commute to work and a return from work.
It's I noticed that actually pop up. I was going to bring it up because I think that's a really good way, again, for yourself to just bookend the day for yourself. I mean, I guess right now, strictly speaking, we're allowed out for our one bit of daily exercise, but I do think that using that time as a commute is a really good idea. If you're used to a commute, if you're used to getting up at a certain time, listening to a certain radio station or whatever it might be, you can use that time to go and have a walk. It's really helpful. You sort of, and then the moment you walk back in through the front door, you're arriving at work, and that can also be quite a good boundary.
As I said earlier, I think one of the other problems you've got is working from home. It's very easy to get sucked into all day Zoom meetings and calls and whatever it might be. You get to the end of the day and you've realised you actually achieved nothing. It's just really convenient after dinner. I'll just take my laptop to the sofa. Obviously, you know who I'm talking about here, and then sitting there for a few hours, and then all of a sudden it's 10 o'clock at night, and you're going, well, "What am I doing?" It's not atypical in my household, anyway.
I think there was just one other question somebody asked, what would you do if you thought somebody was struggling with their poor mental health? Where would you signpost them to? I think just to answer that question, many companies will have an employee assistance program. And if you do have one, I'd strongly recommend that you refer your employees to that process. And that can be incredibly helpful for them. And of course, it's an anonymous way of getting support to you. Other than that, there are local mental health teams that you can refer people to, and I would strongly recommend that people looked at things like Mind, looked at Mental Health First Aid England. So plenty of organisations out there that will be able to offer some support. But as I say, I think there's nothing better than to have a good old conversation, and quite often just having a chat about the way that you're feeling is sufficiently enough to just get it off your chest and be able to move forward.
Yeah, I think the question for me is, as an employer, is how you manage those boundaries, because you almost bring yourself very, very close to a lot of your employees, almost too close in certain instances, because you're breaking down boundaries that have always existed. You're potentially getting yourself let into private information. Now, some of it you would have found out in the course of employment, but now you're moving it to a different level, and it's how you re-establish those boundaries potentially, or maybe you don't. When we return to whatever normal is.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I would strongly recommend getting some mental health training for your team. Certainly I train up mental health first aiders, and I know it's not a legal requirement in the workplace at the moment, but certainly having people in the workplace who have got some knowledge, who are able to have those in confidence conversations that maintains that boundary between the employee and the employer, but still gives them the support that they need in the workplace. And that mental health first aider will also be the person that can signpost. They'll know where the local support mechanisms are in their local area, and they'll be able to signpost an individual to be able to tap into some of those resources. So I'd strongly recommend that companies should be taking the opportunity now to get their employees onto some of those programs and courses.
Yeah, and I think the other thing you need to be conscious of as an employer again is the fact that you'll have employees in lots of very, very different circumstances. Some will have their family with them, some will be living alone, some may have had part of their family not living with them at all because it's just better to socially distance for whatever reason. So everybody's situation is unique, and you've really got to tailor your support to that in every regard.
Absolutely. It's this whole piece around not assuming. Your mountain view right now may be one thing, but your employee's mountain view may look very, very different. And having some appreciation for that means that you can work in a much more supportive way. Sure.
I mean, for me, I think the biggest negative around is listening to the news, because actually all you're listening to is hearing figures about deaths the whole time. For me, that's not going to put you in any sort of positive frame of mind to actually want to deal with anything, to be perfectly frank. I can see people who don't go out in their houses anymore, they just stay at home. They never go out, they don't exercise. Because you can see the pure volume of people who are out walking is minute. I have a son in London, and he's not going out. He's exercising. He exercises, in fact, just doesn't go out unless he has to go shopping.
Yeah. And I think that is one key thing, probably a key message to finish on today, is looking for the opportunities, because there are some amazing opportunities right now when you think about the way that we're able to work, for parents to be able to balance, more readily the balance of work, both working from home but also spending time with their children. I know I don't have children at home, so it's very easy for me to say. I'm sure if I've got a 3 and 4 year old running around all day, I might think slightly differently. But I think there are some amazing opportunities, some great opportunities for employers to think about really what is the work involved, and how can I enable my teams to work more flexibly, because we all want to get that balance absolutely right. And I think, you know, it would be very easy to say, let's look at all of the negatives of this, but I think if we focus on some of those positives, the new sense of community and society within the workplace, I think, you know, is growing hugely, and it will be interesting to see, and maybe the subject for a future webinar is what the future of work is going to look like moving forward, because I think it's going to look very different than it has done in the past, because we're learning so much more, aren't we, about the more effective ways that we can work together.
Good. Yeah, I think that's very interesting. Great.
I was just going to say my personal thanks to Louise for coming along today. That's been absolutely fantastic. And, you know, hearing from you from your first-hand experiences and all the work that you've been doing over the last, oh gosh, you know, few months now, in building the Homeworker magazine.
And I'm impressed your kids haven't managed to get in the room for an hour.
Well, I can just do one now downstairs, so I know my time is running out.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank you, Louise, and thank you, Kate, for the presentation today. It was really interesting. I think it's probably opened up a whole load of questions. Just to remind everybody that we have other webinars available. They're available at the CPCA businesssupport.co.uk/webinars page. And to get in touch for a one-to-one session, please contact that same website /business-support or email support@cpcabusinesssupport.co.uk. I'd like to thank you all again for attending and wish you all the best. Stay safe. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.